Welcome to CISO Insider, Nightfall's chat with Chief Information Security Officers. We host CISOs from different industries to discuss their pathways to the role, the challenges they face in their everyday work, and lessons they can share with anyone aspiring to become a CISO. This podcast brings you into the world of cybersecurity and gives you a window into the most brilliant minds in the business. I'm Chris Martinez. Today on CISO Insider, it's our Season 2 recap episode, featuring the best quotes and highlights from our 6 episodes in Season 2. We gathered insights, lessons, and other valuable soundbites from CISOs and security leaders at Even Financial, Segment, MongoDB, OneMain Financial, and Datadog. Hear from our brilliant guests and make sure to catch their episodes featuring our full interviews for a deep dive into cybersecurity, leadership, and much more. And now, on to the show. Each of our guests this season has helped build a community of cybersecurity within their own organizations. Their impact has helped security practitioners grow at every career stage. Even Financial CISO Mitch Zoller was part of the beginnings of cybersecurity as we know it, learning from and working with some of the most influential cybersecurity leaders of all time, like John McAfee and Steve Katz, whom Mitch identified as the first CISO. Listen to what Mitch has to say about the value of building a career path alongside the most influential people in the industry and where the biggest lessons of his early career came from.
Since the world of data security, as it was called back then, was very small, I was speaking and interacting with people like Steve Katz, who I've stayed in touch with after all these years. Steve, for those listeners who don't know, was the first CISO. So I had a really, and still have a connection with him. His insights into various security ideas stayed with me until today, and I apply many of the things that we spoke about over those past years. I would have lunch with Steve, and we'd discuss where I was going in my career, and he would give me advice. And I probably couldn't get that kind of advice from anybody else in the field because Steve had pretty much the most experience, again, being the first CISO. I also used to speak at conferences with people like, believe it or not, John McAfee and other security leaders who were trying to launch their security products. It was an amazing time in the industry, and I learned a lot from these people in the early days as well. But I think the one person that really changed my thinking about security and mentored me quite a bit was my boss at a place I used to work at, Republic National Bank. He taught me that I needed to make sure that any controls I put in place were as transparent as possible for the user. He used to tell me if they weren't, then people would try to bypass them, and then security wouldn't work. He told me also that you can't slow down the business. Now, we need to find a way to implement security controls in a smart and effective way. He gave me that advice a long time ago, and I still practice it.
Emilio Escobar's experience as CISO of Datadog has given him opportunities to create a culture of security where protecting data is the responsibility of everyone who works at the company. Here he talks to me about how building champions across the company is the best way to scale security.
We have people who, for example, sit in the security SIG chair or co-chair for Kubernetes, right? Like we have that kind of expertise internally, so we definitely trust them with that. And they don't necessarily report to security, but they come with the expertise to do it properly. And then on top of that, we have people who within the security teams who act as advisors for different compliance frameworks or different implementations or technologies. So we can leverage them and embed them deeper with other teams to make sure that security concerns are being addressed appropriately. And then on top of that, we deliver value to customers by providing them with the tools that they need to be able to do things securely, like I mentioned. So that has been evolving as the company has continuously to grow. But very early, we built a culture where security is everyone's responsibility, and we have a pretty good dynamic where people come to us with questions. We work with them. I don't like checkboxes approaches. I don't like throwing things over the fence to other teams, right? So we continuously work on that to make sure that our security teams are deeply involved with product engineers or, let's say, finance or legal operations teams, what have you, on this to make sure that we're working with them alongside on making sure that their stuff is secure as well. So just enabling that trust that goes both ways is probably the best way for you to scale security, where you're building champions across your entire company. And that way you don't have to make sure that security has a one seeing eye everywhere, where it's definitely not going to scale for us.
One main financial CISO, Michelle Valdez, brings up an excellent point about CISOs mentoring fellow leaders within the industry. The best way to build a cybersecurity community is to reach out to others who are looking to become better leaders. Take a listen to Michelle's vision.
When I think about people who have mentored me, one is people who have helped me believe in myself. Imposter syndrome is a real thing. It's a real thing for CISOs. No matter your background, how long you've been in the role, whether you've done it before, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, whether you're an underrepresented minority, it happens to every CISO that I know. So having people to talk to when that happens and help you through it. We have CISO groups where we just kind of rely on each other. Like, I'm having one of those days. Somebody who just prepares you for the communication challenges you're going to face, and the resource challenges. Having somebody, one of my mentors has been helping me and really, really helped prepare me for my first presentation to the board, because I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, I'm presenting to the board of directors. I've never done this before. And they really kind of helped me think through, here are the things that are important to convey and how, which was so beneficial. And those are the kind of things that I think can really help. And this is something that I have talked about, and when I've talked to other people about kind of the mentoring of CISOs, I think that it is something that we don't do well. And I don't know if you've seen the security strategy that the CISO at Equifax published a few weeks ago. I've never seen anybody publish anything like that before. I've read it at least 5 times now. And he speaks to that, how we do not as a community help to grow leaders the way that we should. I wish I had somebody that I could turn to ask, okay, I'm having this challenge, how do I do this? And not be worried that they think that I'm not competent enough to be a CISO because I have a challenge that they may think I should know. So having that community and having people that you can really trust, and tell you what you need to hear, and help you, but not judge you and in any way, shape, or form question your ability of being in the leadership position that you are.
Threats to data security are consistent across all industries. When CISOs face these challenges, their approaches must fit into different aspects of the business and mold to the resources and teams they have. In our chats with our guests, we learn which security threats are top of mind in their organizations. MongoDB Deputy CISO Chris Sandalo talked to us about the threats that exist when working with third-party vendors and systems. How his organization uses credentials is a key concern for protecting MongoDB's internal data and systems.
Personally, I think third-party vendor management is a problem, not only for us, but for everyone. And in particularly, having some level of continuous monitoring of that relationship with third parties. So if we think about security products back in the day, or products in general, you generally had the concept where you could bring a software product on premise. And if that was in your environment, you had some level of control about how you could operate that product, maintain it, put security controls around it. But nowadays, many products simply aren't available on premise, or we don't want to maintain them on premise. So you're stuck with having to accept the security constraints of a SaaS vendor and what they have in place. This often means you might be stuck in a situation where a vendor is business critical, but you're unhappy with their security posture, and you need to make a risk decision and determine if there's other ways you can sort of limit that risk. This sometimes can be very difficult to have a realistic business discussion around, just again, given the difficulty in how we can monitor the security practices of a third-party vendor.
Shadow IT might be a dirty word to some CISOs. Emilio sees it as a valuable way to gauge how well a security org is serving its customers. Reducing the prevalence of shadow IT within the org leads to better outcomes when limiting data sprawl. Take a listen.
Data, it's continuously growing, right? And a lot of people think that data is like garbage. The more you keep it, the more it starts smelling. But it has value and meaning to different teams and different business units. So we have to make sure that our customers have the proper tools that they need to handle and manage their everyday work. So we have a known catalog of services and tools that we use. We know where the data is, so we can help them apply the right level of controls, legal agreements. But then we also create an environment, and our culture is open to people can ask for new tools if the ones that we currently support do not meet their needs. And we enable that, right? So in a way, we're trying to reduce the whole probability of shadow IT, right? So that way we don't put a lot of blockers into people getting the tools that they need for their work. We actually enable and encourage that. And then we work with those teams to understand the lifecycle of data that I mentioned, for what are we using for, who needs access, for how long do we keep it, and then just make it as much as possible like set it and forget it, so they don't have to continuously think about that on top of their day-to-day work that they do, which is probably not security related. Shadow IT in its literal definition is, tools and applications and services that people are using that are not known to IT or security or whatever teams are tasked with maintaining those, or at least being the know of them, right? So that includes legal, for example. In my opinion, I think shadow IT is a good measure to track, right? So at Datadog, I also oversee IT, not just security. So for me, it's a good indicator for how well are we serving our customers. So do we have the right tools in place, or are they being forced, or they feel like they're forced to go elsewhere and get a tool because the current ones don't meet their needs? So I use that as a measure of more of like an IT service quality, or using a product terminology like NPS, like Net Promoter Score, for how much people trust IT, and that they can come to us and say, hey, I need this for X, Y, and Z reason, and we have a system built that way they can go get it.
Segment VP of Security, Colleen Coolidge, also sees the need to increase security among the third-party vendors that her teams work with. But it's only one piece of the cybersecurity puzzle. She also talks to us about business continuity planning for the new reality of working through COVID, and how leaders can plan for managing employee burnout on their teams. Because keeping your teams intact and healthy is just as important as maintaining the software and systems you use in your everyday work.
Two things come to mind. One is, this increased focus on third-party security. So all the vendors that we're all using, when you think about what your stack really is, or even just the tools that you use, if, way back in the day, you might have some software that was actually installed on your desktop. There would be a certain number of licenses, and it's kind of like all contained, and things would be like contained in your data center. Now, when you think about what makes up just even like HR security, if you look at all of the different tools that your HR department uses, none of those things are things that you built, first of all. And then second of all, it's not as though these things were like installed onto a person's desktop and it's being closely locked down and monitored. These are all SaaS tools that you don't have a huge amount of control over. So I think that really like a reckoning with anything that's a third-party tool that you depend on, making sure that not that you send that vendor like 900 more questions a year, because I don't really think adding a ton more questions helps to your understanding. I think it's really about how do you put controls in place so that if they have some deficiencies, but your business insists on using them, how do you guard yourself? How do you guard yourself and your users in that data? So that's one. But then the second thing has been sort of a strange BCP related type concern, which is all of your security professionals who work for you over the past year have been working extremely hard. We're kind of a nervous bunch. We're always looking over our shoulder. We're looking over your shoulder. We're looking over everyone's shoulder. And I think that a lot of security people are suffering from burnout, and we are counting the days until we get, fully vaccinated, until the thing that we want to go do opens back up. I actually think we're going to have like a personnel shortage where everybody is trying to take off at the same time and go to, Europe or Africa or Asia and just go visit family, go on like an extremely long vacation. People are going to want to take like 2 months off of work. And if you think you already have a people shortage now, imagine when everybody wants to take vacation at the same time. And people are entitled, because if you think about how hard the last year has been on everyone, it's kind of like we might need to do like a shutdown of some sort, like just so people can go and like really go spend time with their family, really go spend time with their friends, and go and do the things that they would normally have done. But who wants to take a vacation during COVID? When nobody's vaccinated, it's not safe, places aren't opened up, and then you're afraid for your life and your family's life. Of course, you're not feeling like you want to go on a fun vacation and just throw caution to the wind.
We're going to take a brief break and get back to more highlights from our Season 2 recap. You're listening to CISO Insider from Nightfall AI.
Nightfall DLP is the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution designed for high-growth companies securing sensitive data across cloud apps like Slack, GitHub, and Google Drive. Traditional data security solutions are painful to implement, require heavy overhead, and have high false positive rates. Nightfall customers are up and running in minutes with our library of machine learning detectors to protect PII, PHI, and other industry-specific data. Our developer-centric platform allows security teams to configure content inspection as code for customizable data protection. Learn more at CISOinsider.com/NightfallAI.
In these conversations with our guests, we heard one common theme come up frequently: the need for CISOs to understand the business priorities of their organizations and how to build security initiatives that support the direction of the business. Mitch learned how to become an advocate for the business over his career as a security leader in fintech and financial services. Here's how he encourages security leaders to create and build partnerships with stakeholders across the business.
Coming from the world of big banks, most of my career, I understand my peers in those institutions and how they operate and practice security. When you're in a fintech, the culture is usually very different compared to large institutions. So I would advise those in fintechs, if they haven't done any work in large corporations, to listen and to forge relationships with your security peers in those larger organizations. And keep in mind that they may operate in different ways, but we all have the same end goal, and everybody usually works really well together. I truly believe that each side can learn from each other, whether it be about business or security. Also remember that you not only need to deal with security, but you need to be an advocate for the business, as I said before. So the role of the CISO has matured in many organizations to where you're a member of the business team as well. So understanding your business and that of the institution you're partnering with is important for a win-win outcome. And finally, some people may be intimidated by the largest security teams that big financials have. Don't be. Again, try to forge a partnership with those teams. You'd be surprised how many of the same issues they share with fintechs. Again, there are things that are different, but there's a lot of things that are the same.
Colleen identifies leadership for CISOs as balancing their technical knowledge with management savvy. She says communicating key ideas like the roadmap, objectives, and accomplishments of the security team with the rest of the company, including the board and executives, is one of the most important skills for CISOs to have. Take a listen.
As far as skills go, most security leaders I know came up through security through particular paths. Maybe it was like application security, maybe it was network security, maybe they had a strong governance, risk, compliance type background. I don't know. But once you get to a very high level in security, I think that being able to command an army rather than trying to show off your glory days of how technical you once were and saying like, I always kept my hand in it. Like I could still hang with my team. Like, why would you want to do that? Like when you've moved away from that, that's your team's domain. That's their area for them to shine. Like that's like it's the typical like parent who like comes into a feed or in Facebook or whatever it is, and then like makes it all about them. It's not all about you showing off to your team and everyone else like, hey, I'm not insecure. I just kept technical. Like it's great for you if you've kept technical. If you've had time to really be as deeply technical as the IC5s on your team, awesome. But are you also as good at what your main job is, which is, again, commanding that army? The different parts of your security teams, are you able to inspire and lead all of them? Are you able to put together a roadmap and a vision that speaks to every single person on your team? Can they map their daily work to your 5-year vision? Do your executives understand where you're trying to go? Do they understand why your set of security teams is good? Do they understand the main principles of what you're trying to get across? Like when you become that leader on that side, you need to be very effective at those levels.
Chris finds relationship building with people throughout the company to be a successful method for ensuring that his team's progress aligns with the company's overall business objectives. Including the needs and processes of your stakeholders in the security strategy and vision makes for a more comprehensive plan. Let's hear from Chris.
One thing that I always talk to my colleagues about, and particularly the people on my team, is that you must desire for your colleagues to succeed. We don't need to be people's best friends, but it's really important to understand what success means for them, understand those teams' processes, their perspective, and their role. And if you have this information, it's easier to create a relationship with someone in a non-combative way so that they're comfortable sharing information with you. And I felt that's really, really helpful just to understand what's out there and to sort of maintain visibility and make people comfortable working with us. Secondly, we also invest in a security championship program. And I found this to be really, really helpful, again, to sort of connect our team with others out there that have a security interest. So at MongoDB, we specifically speak with people across multiple different departments, and we engage with them regularly and utilize this relationship, again, for info gathering, focus training, as well as proof of concepts or pilots amongst a group of people that have some passion for security. And lastly, this is sort of sounds obvious, but it's really, really important to be aligned with business objectives. So thinking about the direction of where the business is going and sort of expanding upon that and understanding if we make a certain product decision or a certain change, what does that mean to the security posture of the product? What does that mean to our current plans? And does it impact our capabilities at all? The common theme here is really relationships and making sure that you nurture those relationships and understand the perspective of the people you're working with.
Were you surprised to hear that some of our CISOs came from non-traditional backgrounds? Technical know-how is definitely a requirement for the role, but it's not always necessary to have those skills when starting in the role. Other skills, like understanding how to align with business priorities like we discussed earlier, are becoming more and more important for the up-and-coming CISO. According to a 2019 PricewaterhouseCoopers and Harvard Business Review Analytic Services survey, 63% of respondents said culture will be among the top 5 responsibilities for CISOs within 3 years. The time of building so-called soft skills is now. Our guests shared the unique abilities each brings to their role. Conventional thinking has made technical skills a given in some cases, or just more important than other strengths like effective leadership, clear communication, and relationship building. Michelle has thrived in the CISO role without a technical background. As she mentioned earlier in one of our season highlights, there was a time when she convinced herself she couldn't do the job. But by leveraging her strengths and learning how those traits and skills fit into the big picture and her companies, Michelle has succeeded as a technical leader. Let's hear a bit from her story on how CISOs with non-technical backgrounds can make it work.
Yeah, first I would say is don't convince yourself you can't do it, particularly if you don't have a deep technical background. I think that there are some companies and some CISO roles where the way that it is structured, they want somebody who is highly technical. And so those just aren't going to be the right roles for somebody who isn't highly technical, who hasn't been an engineer, who hasn't been in incident response, working in a SOC. There are roles and more roles these days that are there where people are looking for leaders who can communicate to the business in a non-technical way, in a way that's meaningful to them, and who manage risk. It's more and more becoming about managing risk. I think it's always been that way, but I think it's now driving, in some cases, different skill sets. It always depends upon each organization, but I was very fortunate to be brought on to a role where I work for our chief risk officer, and I focus on risk. I mean, it is all about how are we ensuring that we are minimizing the risk to our company from a cybersecurity perspective. I don't have a technical background. I never coded. I never was an engineer. I had a law enforcement background. And I built programs in organizations, and I'm a process person. I, at one point, convinced myself there was no way I could do this role. Never going to be able to get there because I just wasn't technical enough. So what I would suggest to people is learn the different aspects of cyber. You don't have to be experts in them. As a matter of fact, I think it's almost problematic if you're too much of an expert in any one field, because it's hard for you to then let your team lead and do what they need to do, and for you to be more strategic. But learn the different aspects. Surround yourself with experts who can help teach you. I mean, I hire some of the greatest experts who know way more about anything than I do about what they do, and that's actually how it should be. You want to surround yourself with the best people, because one, I learn from them every day, and it makes us have a better program because of it. Cybersecurity is still this mystical thing to a lot of people. They're just like, that's in the news, and I don't have to worry about it because there's a team of people who do everything about it. Like, I don't even have to concern myself. And that's one of the hardest things when you're building a framework and you're building a program that you really have to transform, is helping everybody understand their critical role in cybersecurity, regardless of what they do.
Colleen told us she was tricked into going into security. As a project manager who is focused on systems that analyze mortgage data for subprime lenders, her role at the time initially had very little to do with security. It was in that project where she found her passion for InfoSec. Here's Colleen giving us the long story short version of how she met the security specialist who put her onto her path and how she's leveraged her skills that led to her becoming VP of security at Segment.
He's like, but not anyone can do security. And he's like, the way that you helped transform this project into something that was really horrible into something that was actually pretty good in the end. He's like, that's the kind of transformation that we need. And if you're a person who can do that, you should come work in this field. And he's like, just think about it. He's like, what if, how about you give it a try for 1 year? If you do it for 1 year and I'll point you in the right direction, I'll make sure you get trained. And if you hate it, if it's not for you, you can always go back to managing projects. So I was like, sure, why not? I'm early enough in my career that this could be okay. And so I did it. And he put me through like a week of SANS training. So it was like Unix security, Windows security, network security, cryptography, the standard with the lab and the test. And so I was like, okay, I think I can do some of this stuff. But many of those topics were like things that I had really never dealt with before. And they went quite deep, which I wasn't necessarily ready for. And so I did okay. And he decided like the way to really solidify the training that I have and to get a sense of what everything, was out there for security, he decided to put me on like these little 3-month secondments. So I would drop into a particular part of the team. So for example, with the network security folks, and at the time that they were really getting into forensics using NCASE, and they were just like, we're having some issues with people possibly doing something weird with loans, come help us. So I learned how to use NCASE, how to do, maintain chain of custody, how to do the collection of evidence, how to do the searches. I'd essentially just go like group by group, jump in and help with all of the grunt work. And so if they needed documentation made or updated, then I would do that. If they needed, reviews to be done, like if it's an access review, then so that's my job. For the other side of network security, they were just like handed me this green pager and they said, do you know what this is for? And I was like, yeah, it's like when your friends call you and you can send messages. They're like, no, it means you're on call. And when you're on call, when it goes off, you need to respond. And these are the procedures you need to follow. And so I was then, I had to look at the alerts coming in from the firewall and the IPS. And being a beginner and being thrown at the bottom of like each of these stacks was not fun. There were days that I went home and I was crying and I was like, this is the worst thing ever. Like, why would anybody sign up for this job? But it taught me, the very basics of what it's like to be on each of these teams. And he'd even done that for the application security side. And I was just like, I don't have a developer background. And they're like, yeah, but can you threat model? Can you follow directions? Can you have other people follow directions? Like, yes, have that background. Great. You're going to stand and present and do a threat model for this particular application over here. And I found that it wasn't as terrible as I thought. And one of the best things from that secondment where I went to, app security, network security, and like desktop security, just going through each of the groups, the most gracious group of internal customers I ever came across was definitely the developers, because, I told them right away, like, look, I don't have the same background that you do. The background that I have is security. And even then, like, I've only been doing a short time, but here's what I do know. And so I found that the developers were extremely helpful, helping me to decompose their application, where are the inputs and the outputs, who would care about attacking this? What is the most valuable piece of this? So going through that, I don't even think I did an awesome job, but the look of discovery on their faces and like, oh my gosh, I don't think anybody had ever sat with them before and asked them to look at their application and their features the way that an attacker would, because they always looked at it as if they're a user and they wanted to maximize and get the most out of everything, and it's like, but what if you have a user who's bad? How would any of these protections change? So I would say it was mutually beneficial. My boss really wanted me to gain experience in every single area. Like, he even had me do a stint with the physical security, so the building security folks, anything that he could think of. And he's like, oh, there's an audit coming up. We need you to do some review work and get prepared. And if we did bad on something, like help write the management response. So I think I got like the full buffet table of what it was like to work in security. And at the end of that first year, then he came to me and said, like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about your review. He's like, you've learned so much, everything from working on NCASE to writing policies to helping us try to pass audits, to working on the IDS to like revamping, network documentation and helping developers. Like, do you really want to go back to just managing projects? And I think he knew the answer was no. Like, how could I, even though I had started at the very bottom and honestly still was at the bottom, there was just so much richness in the broad field of security that there's just no way that I would go back.
Mitch has a passion for writing and teaching that makes him stand out among CISOs working in the field today. As a professor at Rutgers University and a regular contributor to publications like CISO Magazine, Mitch is able to share his expertise and knowledge in ways that go beyond his day-to-day work as a CISO. Let's hear from Mitch on how he gives back to the cybersecurity community through these contributions.
I usually try to dedicate one class a semester where I explain the various domains of information security to my students and what it takes to get a job in those areas. I also bring real-life examples from organizations I've worked at into the classroom, which I think is really important. And many times I've explained to my students current hacks that were reported in the news, because invariably we'd always have something that happened during the semester. This company got hacked, this company had a breach, or whatever it was. It always happens at least once during the semester. So we'd actually be able to take that and start dissecting it a little bit. I remember when I first started teaching at Rutgers, I asked those who were going to graduate what their next steps were. And most of them said that they weren't sure, since they learned a lot of theory, but not enough practical hands-on skill. So at that point, I decided to add a Splunk lab to the syllabus. I have this great engineer, David Wiedesek from Splunk, he's great. He drove down from Boston every semester to run the lab. Of course, now we do it by Zoom. But the best part is that the students get a certificate for basic Splunk skills, which they can now put on their resume. And I did have two people who actually sent me an email and they said, thanks for the lab. I put it on my resume. I actually got an interview and I'm starting to work low level in a SOC. So again, really gratifying. Also, I find it very satisfying when my former students contact me and ask for advice. This may help them get their first security position. So if I find out they actually did get their job, again, they'll send me something through LinkedIn, which is really fantastic. And hopefully I had some small part of getting them there. I have one former student who now works for the FBI Cyber Division. Because what I used to do in class before the pandemic was I used to have the FBI come into class and give a lecture on what it's like to work within the FBI. And this student went and talked to this person, got his card, and it progressed where the student now is actually working for the FBI Cyber Division. Another former student recently reached out to me, and I helped him with some tips on his upcoming interview at Google. So there are many others who have gone on to obtain security jobs since I started teaching. And I think at the end of the day, this is where I get a lot of satisfaction from in teaching. There are many security practitioners that write articles, for our peers, which entail many, great security topics. I like to focus a portion of my career on the first canon for my SACA, which says, protect society, the common good, necessary, public trust and confidence, and the infrastructure. So to that end, many years around tax time, I publish articles about tax fraud and how to protect against it from a cybersecurity point of view. One of the biggest challenges is conveying to non-technical terms how scammers and hackers steal millions from unsuspecting Americans each year, especially the elderly. And again, I've known two people that this happened to. It really upset me tremendously. So I started, putting these articles out. The article always includes tips, can save someone's life saving or just heartache knowing that they lost money. I also wrote an article for CISO Magazine that was titled Volunteer Your Services, Not Your Personal Information, which actually came out, again, about another true story that happened to me. I helped a nonprofit who had their database of volunteers hacked. Of course, there was PII, personal identifiable information, in that database, and the volunteers weren't too happy it was stolen. The article tells a story and then gives practical tips to those, volunteers that want to volunteer their services to worthy causes. And it's interesting, I had someone from the InfoSec community say he sent it to a few of his relatives who do volunteer work many times a year, and they implement some of the tips I wrote about. So again, I love doing that stuff.
Great leaders are able to integrate their individual perspectives on the issues they're tasked to solve into a strategy that fits with their company's plans and growth. By bringing the lessons and tactics they've learned over their careers, each of our guests on Season 2 of CISO Insider has helped improve their company's security outcomes. Chris makes time to educate peers and make senior leaders in his organizations aware of the goal of the security program. He makes these lessons tangible through tabletop exercises that are inclusive and focused on current issues. We hope you'll gain some inspiration from Chris's approach.
It's really important to educate and make your peers and other senior leaders aware of the goal of your security program. Again, this might sound kind of obvious, but it's important to state that the goal is not to make a hardened shell that's completely impenetrable, that can't be hacked. That's nearly impossible, or if it was possible, it would be infinitely expensive. So really, the discussion should be around raising attacker cost and making it sort of non-feasible to attack certain parts of a company because it would be too expensive for an attacker. We are resource constrained, but so are the attackers, and the attackers are not going to go after something that's very, very hardened. But I think sort of selling this point and making everyone aware that this is your objective is a key point in sort of understanding how risk decisions and risk discussions should go. In particular, I'm a big fan of using tabletop exercises to highlight this and to sort of raise awareness, particularly among executives. We've had a lot of success in doing that. Topic-wise, we tend to stay on whatever's forefront in the news. So in particular, our objective here is to raise awareness amongst other people that are not security professionals. So they'll have the level of knowledge that you would see it on like a CNN.com front page, very high level, this sort of hack thing happened. So we try to construct a scenario that includes that level of detail, but also includes areas within the business that we could use additional guidance on and how we want to solve that particular problem. So I'll give you one critical example. So ransomware is a great example. And the general idea of, could we be ransomed here? What would that look like? How would we respond? What would it look like to our customers? Do we have the appropriate playbooks to respond for different teams, whether that be comms, engineering, or other teams? These can lead to a lot of really, really interesting discussions, and also highlights to different leaders that they may have gaps that we need to address.
Emilio found validation in his personal approach to security over the last year working through the challenge of COVID. Keeping people throughout Datadog informed on IT and security policy decisions has helped Emilio's team and the people that work with those teams feel included and take ownership of their work. Hear from Emilio on why customer-first communications for internal and external customers alike has always been a priority.
An important reminder, and I'm sure it came with lessons, is that people are generally, interested in everything that happens, right? People want to know what security or IT or any other team is thinking. Why are we doing things? How can we help? How does it impact me? How does it compare priority-wise to other priorities, and what are the trade-offs? So I think focusing on transparency is critical, right? People want to be in the know, people want to be involved, and people want to feel included, right? I think the most successful culture is one where you allow people to feel included in everything about it. And Datadog does a really good job at communicating business ideas, business directions, business reasons, business results with our employees, so that way they feel included and that their work actually matters, and it leads to more than just the day-to-day, sprint to sprint, OKR to OKR sort of view that you can have if you don't understand what the big picture is. So I think that was a good lesson learned within the last year. I've carried that before, right? But it's always refreshing to see that as a reminder every day at Datadog now. The second of it is first time managing or overseeing IT. I have a great IT team and a great IT leader, and I've always had a customer first mentality, right? I did consulting for a long time early in my career, so that taught me to really be customer first. But in IT, that's even more critical, right? Because IT is a team where I've seen this in other places where, let's say, security makes a policy change, or let's say they want to implement even two-factor authentication, right? When two-factor was coming out, like when security teams would say, we have a new security policy where we must have two-factor authentication everywhere, it's usually IT that takes the brunt of it, right? And security, most of the time is siloed. They just make the policy change, and IT has to deliver, and they're the ones dealing with the tickets, the comments of the users, the training of everyone. So what I've learned a lot with IT is having more visibility into that, and how much of the customer story we have to focus on before we make drastic changes, or any change in particular. and sort of deal with that change curve, right? And be transparent about why we're doing it and what's the outcome that we're looking for. So that's been a huge lesson for me in the last year.
Michelle talks to us about the growing importance of data security for CISOs. The needs and requirements of the business can change rapidly, especially during COVID and the new normal of remote work. Hear from Michelle speaking to the importance of protecting data in her role at OneMain Financial.
I think that this is something that is becoming more and more prominent in the CISO role than before. Early on, it was about protecting the environment. How do you protect the environment? At first it was keep people out, and people realized that was not realistic because nothing is impenetrable. So then it was, well, if they get in, keep them from getting anything out. And obviously that isn't working either. So I know that one of the things that we as an organization are really emphasizing from a cybersecurity perspective is the data. So as everybody's environment is changing and shifting, I mean, with COVID, we went from people being in the office to being working from home. So your attack surface has expanded, in many cases exploded. And that perimeter is starting to evaporate. So it really has to be about how do you protect the data? And that is a major key focus of our strategy at OneMain, is really making sure that we are putting in place the proper technology, the proper people, and the proper process to make sure that we are thinking through data security, so that if a bad actor gets into our environment, they aren't going to be able to get what is our best commodity, which is our data.
We had a great time hosting these 5 cybersecurity leaders on Season 2 of CISO Insider. The best part of our conversations with these pros is getting to hear their stories and experiences in their own words. We hope you enjoyed the second season of CISO Insider. Season 3 is coming soon with more interviews and insights from the best and brightest minds in the cybersecurity field. We look forward to sharing these stories with you coming later in 2021. See you soon! Thanks for listening to CISO Insider, a podcast created and sponsored by Nightfall AI, the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts. The ratings and reviews help more people find us. Special thanks to Wendell Topper for podcast production support. Learn more about Wendell's work at www.createch.us. That's CREATEK.us. Follow Nightfall on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Nightfall AI. That's Nightfall AI, and email us at marketing@nightfall.ai with questions, feedback, and suggestions about CISO Insider, including suggestions for CISOs you'd like to hear from. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you again next time.